Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to another episode of Sayehsunstudio. My name is Saye, and this is the first in a 4-part series that will cover the 4 seasons in my garden. I decided to make this video since, during this pandemic, I've been having a lot of conversations with friends about how to turn their gardens into spaces that are healthy and sustainable. Even though I've been gardening my whole life, to be honest with you, I never really even questioned what it meant to have a garden until about 10 years ago. Initially, I regarded gardening as just beautifying a space. But now I've come to see it as a statement about how I value nature. It's gone from just aesthetics to a space which contributes to the health of my family, all creatures I share it with, the environment, as well as my community. The more I understand the interconnectedness of the web of life that surrounds me, the more I realize that my family's health depends on keeping that web of life healthy. So I wanted to make my garden a sanctuary for all wildlife: bees, butterflies, birds, squirrels, and whatever else that passed through. So join me as I take you through 1 year in the life of my Zone 5B garden in Toronto, Canada. Let's go! 14 years ago, we moved to this house that sits on a corner lot. We have a driveway in the front and a fenced backyard with a patio. The trees are a large 50-year-old Norway maple in the front and 2 other maples and a beech tree on the side. And of course, it was all grass except for the predictable small gardens. Over the years, I've added a sour cherry, 2 natives, and a couple of other fruit trees. But maybe the most important impact was the pond I dug up in the backyard and the large gardens I put to the side. The other stuff, you need pictures to see. So 14 years ago, our property was a typical one with lots and lots of grass and some planting bunched up around the house. Besides vowing not to use pesticides and fertilizers, not much happened for a few years until I planted an apple and a pear tree in the front of the house. The following year, I made a garden around the 2 trees. And another 2 years, I'd read about the damage lawns did to the ecosystem, so I set upon a mission to expand the existing gardens. That same year, I stopped watering the grass during the summer, allowing it to go dormant, and this reduced so much of the water I'd been using that I decided to expand the gardens even more. I got a mantis tiller and began digging up new garden beds. These were planted with varieties that were hardy, and the sod I dug up was piled up next to the big Norway maple to make it look like a giant mound and create a hilly feature. This turned out to be a great solution because I wanted a garden bed there, but I didn't want to risk damaging the roots of my beautiful tree. So 5 years ago, I read an article by Canadian gardening guru Mark Cullen in which he mentioned that adding a water source was the best thing to do for wildlife. So I dug up a pond. Again, I piled up the soil I dug up next to it for a mound. I know the idea of a pond can be very daunting, but we kept it very simple. We just started with 2 goldfish, and guess what? They had lots of babies, and we've been keeping those babies since. It's actually very important to have goldfish in your pond because they eat all the mosquito larvae that ends up being in the water. So very good pest management. Since we didn't want to have any kind of electrical filtration system, we rely on natural ways to keep the water clean. This includes perennial plants that filter it, as well as some floating seaweed we purchase, and we add barley extract. All in all, the wildlife loves our little pond. And in the front, my slow expansion onto the lawn was in full force, as I put down landscaping fabric and added stone pathways to create permeable surfaces that would absorb rainwater. It was the year that I began making the switch to native and naturalized plants in my garden. No more annuals. Everything I planted had to be a perennial that added some value. And in another 2 years, my plants became established. My decision really paid off as I completely stopped watering my garden. I do make exceptions for the first-year plants that need to get established, and also in cases of prolonged drought. Otherwise, the plants have to make do with whatever nature provides. So how did my gardening start this year? Well, it was April 10th when I saw the first signs of life in the garden, and they were in the form of hyacinths. Now, these lovely bulbs just kind of do their own thing, grow, they're very fragrant, nothing likes to dig them up, and in addition to crocus, they're just perfect. They start blooming in April and go right until May. But the one thing that was interesting this year was my winter aconite. These were tiny blooms that pop up. Initially they looked just like round yellow balls, and the petals open up to reveal this gorgeous yellow flower, and they were fantastic, and I plan on expanding them. And the other early bloomer for me is a Lenten Rose. It starts out with really light colored blooms that darken up, and it pretty much blooms for 2 whole months, which is more than you can expect for any spring bloomer. This is them going really dark. Well, one of my favorite plants in the spring has to be this Liverwort. It blooms on this really crusty old looking foliage, and the blooms are just so elegant. It's almost like a watercolor painting. It's native to Canada and loved by bees, and it will bloom for a long time, and when the blooms start to fade away is when the foliage starts to appear. Now, something I like just as much but is not native is this lungwort. There's really bristly leaves with these beautiful blooms that start pink and go dark purple. And possibly the cutest scene was this bumblebee trying to stuff itself into a blossom. And speaking of bees, my favorite topic, solitary bees. Did you know that your garden is home to a whole bunch of bees that live in wood stems and stalks? Look at this. Hey, setting up a nest there. Throughout this video, I'm going to mention bees that I've seen in my garden, and flowers like this Glory-of-the-snow are excellent sources of nectar for these bees that emerge really early on. So this little mining bee actually has a nest in the ground, and it really relies on this nectar to get started. These are actually babies from last year that are emerging now. And this sweat bee, I think, is probably my favorite picture. I just caught it at the right time as it was leaving the flower. Well, I'm not an expert in bees, but I do use an app called iNaturalist that helps me identify. All my observations are loaded up into a general database, and scientists all over the world use it to track sightings of different insects and plants. So not only am I learning more, I'm actually helping scientists all over know what's happening in my area. Whenever I come across some wood that's been cut up on the side of the road, I stop and I grab it, because I put them in the garden, and as they decompose, they become great nesting areas for all kinds of creatures. And these were slabs that I picked up last year, and I turned them into little steps. I know that the bees will have lots of fun for years to come. So by the end of April, the hyacinth are joined with daffodils. Such a perfect combination for those aromatic spring smells. This is a side garden I dug up a few years ago. So now it's filled with daffodils in spring. As May creeps in, you can see the garden starting to come to life. Early spring is the chance for woodland flowers to shine. These are things that occur in woods, so the only time they really can bloom is before the trees have foliage. And one of the first is my rock cress, followed right away by my butterfly violet. Now everybody thinks violets are not that cute. Look at those purple speckles. But my favorite woodland flower has to be Canadian wild ginger. You see the little bumps at the base of the two leaves? Well, guess what? That turns into a stunning flower. And unless you know it's there and go looking for it, you'll miss it. It's adorable. Another thing that blooms at this time of year is heartleaf. And it's got mounds of floating, beautiful blue flowers. So, nice one to have. But maybe the surprising one for me this year was prairie buttercup. It was the first year I was growing it, and those yellow blooms are absolutely delightful. As we get to mid-May, my cherry tree bursts out into blossom. And it's around that time that I see my first bumblebee as it crawls out of its nest in the ground. And that is the time where my small pussy toes start blooming. And yes, they look like little kitten feet. That's where they get their name. This hardy, drought-tolerant ground cover is perfect for any garden. And within a few weeks, those blooms turn into fluffs that fly away with the wind. There's probably no sweeter smell in the garden than those of the lily of the valley. I absolutely love the aroma. They're very dainty and elegant, and soon they're joined by the burst of color that is my azalea. Now this azalea grows in a corner of the garden that has slightly more acidic soil, and it just flourishes. It's covered like a carpet with these gorgeous blooms that last for weeks, and it marks the beginning of the plants that bloom later on in the spring, most famously tulips. Now growing tulips in my area is a bit of a challenge because the squirrels love to eat the blooms and dig up the bulbs. But over the years, as I've begun using more and more crushed eggshells, I've kind of had a truce with the squirrels. They don't dig them up as much as they would like to, so I've got beautiful blooms. And Daphne is another one that quietly blooms away in another corner. My Japanese Kerria also blooms at the end of May. These pom-poms of yellow flowers just cover the entire plant. It's adorable. And of course, this is the time where my Columbine also starts to bloom. Now, Columbines, I think, should be in every garden because they're such an important source of nectar for all the bees. They love it, and I had some of the best times in the garden taking pictures of the bees. Absolutely lovely. With the start of June, my daffodils fade away, and my neighbors also come around to remind me that I need to cut the grass. And I explain to them that I'm part of a new campaign called No Mow May, where I leave the grass tall until June, and this supports a wide range of pollinators who use these wildflowers, like these clovers, as a source of nectar. You can read about it at Plant Life. And another benefit of June is irises. I think I've said favorite plant a lot of times in this video, but they really are my favorite flower. I have quite a few different varieties, but my hand-to-hand combat with the iris borer has kind of sucked the joy out of those. The ones that bloom consistently and painlessly are the Dutch irises. They're not affected by the borer, and they come back year after year. But besides that, I have quite a few varieties, and I absolutely enjoy this time of year. And we'll look through a little bit more of the irises until we come across this little buddy, and this is my Persian Onion. It's going to be blooming later on, so I'll show you the video later on, but I have to point out two plants that were absolutely delightful for me this year. Bachelor button gave me countless hours of joy, including my first sighting of the green metallic sweat bee, which is the official bee of Toronto. And people told me they'd never seen it, but once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere. It's adorable. And I think because of the color combination, I got some really dramatic pictures. And my second favorite plant has to be these garlic chives. I'd kind of run over every chance I get to take pictures, because there was always something to see. Not only were they absolutely adorable and tasty, but they attracted all different kinds of pollinators. And things like that are the benefit of gardening, of seeing things thrive in your garden. This is a little Solomon seal. Lupines didn't bloom that much this year, but they were quite beautiful. And I had a purple sage and milkweed, which you're going to learn all about in the next segment. Well, my friends, it's time to say goodbye to spring, and I would like to thank you for taking a walk through my garden. As we end this segment, I just wanted to say thanks for watching. If you like this segment, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel with the link below the video. And don't forget to turn on the notifications so you know when there's a new video. If you live in Canada, feel free to check out my Etsy shop where you can find seeds for many of the plants you've seen in this video, but only for Canada. And I'll end with a warm thanks to Cleo and the Six for her guest appearance. Until next time, happy growing, my friends.